Well, good day, viewers. Today we have a 2012 Ford F-150 4x4. Of course, it's got to be a 4x4. It's not a real truck. Anyways, it's got a problem with one of the vacuum hub locks or integrated wheel ends. It's probably leaking on one side, and then the other side is partially engaging, so it makes a rapid buzzing and clicking sound. So we're going to put it up in the air and check to see which side has failed, which side holds vacuum, which side doesn't. And we're going to do a delete on this. So I just lifted it up in the air, and when I spin this wheel, that vacuum hub lock should be off now, because these are vacuum, no, these are vacuum off. It should be released, but you can hear it's dragging. And it's been like that for some time, because he mentioned this to me a few months ago. So chances are the teeth on the wheel bearing are damaged now for sure. So once you get it up in the air and the wheel's off of it, you have to take this cap off, and there's a 14mm nut behind it that holds the end of the axle shaft, CV shaft. I have to take the brake caliper assembly off. Now the brakes look like they've been recently repaired, so we're just going to take the whole caliper off and hang it over here by the frame. I'm not going to undo the wheel speed sensor yet until I see what the back of the wheel bearing looks like. I do this by disconnecting the upper ball joint and tilting the knuckle, top of the knuckle out, and then, well, I'll show you. We'll get started. Okay, so I like to use this 90-degree impact gun to remove the upper ball joint nut. But we're going to put it back on 3 or 4 threads. This is pretty rusty. And then if you hit the upper control arm or upper knuckle here, let's take the rotor off. It's sitting here anyways. It should release. Just like that. And then use a pry bar. Well, gravity's working today. And we can tip this knuckle out now. I didn't disconnect this yet because I want to see what the wheel bearing looks like. You got to turn the wheel. So the axle won't come out of here, but if you take these 3 nuts off and take the integrated wheel end off, I've got the vacuum hose disconnected here, you can sneak it out enough by tilting that axle or steering knuckle out. You don't need to undo the lower ball joint. So you undo these 3 small 6mm bolts with 8mm heads. And then we can see the back of the wheel bearing in there. So you can see that you can tilt the upper knuckle out enough to get the axle shaft out of the bearing assembly, and there's the vacuum hub lock full of rust. And let's have a look at the back of the wheel bearing. They're not bad. I expected to see a lot worse. Let's have a look in here. You know, these are the teeth that I'm worried about here. Where are we? There we go. So these teeth here, these don't look too bad. Spin the bearing, make sure it's not rough. I think we're just going to put a plug in here so that we don't get any dirt in this needle bearing here, and clean it all out and put it back together with the delete kit, which I'll show you in a minute. So this is the Dorman wheel end coupler, they call it, which is basically a delete kit. It looks like the existing ones, does both sides basically, but there's a solid mechanical link in there. Now you must clean the shaft and the bearing, and clean this surface area in here where the coupler bolts on, because it'll be full of rust and it'll actually push the coupler away from these teeth here. These teeth don't look too bad. We're going to put some chassis grease in here. See how I put a cap in here to keep crap out of there while I was cleaning. Anyways, now it's just a matter of reassembling. So I used some light wheel bearing grease, and I packed this full of grease too. Now you wouldn't use wheel bearing grease on a vacuum hub lock, but if you put this over top of here now, you can actually sneak it in here. Just like so. And this dummy nipple goes up, and you reuse the existing fasteners. Like I said, if you don't remove the rust on there, especially if you're putting integrated wheel ends, vacuum hub locks on, it tends to push this out because these aluminum ears will just bend, and that increases the risk of it disengaging. If I was putting a new vacuum hub lock on here, I would probably recommend to change that axle because it has a little bit of, or not wheel bearing, because it has a little bit of wear on the end of the teeth. But the bearing feels nice and smooth, and it's a shame to change a $300 or $400 wheel bearing. This will remain locked all the time, so it will have a very small negative impact on fuel economy because of the additional drivetrain drag. So the front axles will be turning all the time instead of only in four-wheel drive. But the half tons are vacuum to disengage, and the 3/4 tons and 1 tons are vacuum to engage. But the 3/4 and 1 tons, I think Ford knew that they were, as it was a shitty design, so they put a mechanical override on the 3/4 tons and 1 tons. The F250s and 350s, and probably the bigger ones too. Actually, the bigger ones might be solid axle. I put grease on that rusty surface where I cleaned it off. I put grease all in there. There ends up being a grease nipple on this coupler as well. Right here I should say. Got my hand in the way. Now it's just a matter of, I got the wheels turned to the left, reattaching the upper ball joint. I'm going to get some Loctite on that ball joint. So the upper ball joint nut is 111 foot-pounds. Technically you're supposed to replace that nut because it's a lock nut, but I put Loctite on it. This nut is 30 foot-pounds. It just holds the end of the axle. And the little 6 mil bolts, if you really want to know, are 106 inch-pounds. And this nut I thought was 14 mil is actually 13 mil. So that's one side done. And as you can see, there is a grease fitting on here. So we're going to give it a few shots of grease just to be safe. I did put some grease into the splines. So this is engaged 100% of the time now. So that's one side back together. The other side's basically a repeat. I just got to reattach the brake hose and reroute the speed sensor wire. Yeah.